Affirmative rebuttal, 10 minutes.
There's something basic here that's not being said in my colleague's presentation. What is democracy? If it's not equal rights, what is it? I mean, the very basic concept of a democracy or a liberal order is equal rights. You cannot have a state that have two sets of laws, one for Jews and one for non-Jews, and call that a democracy. It just doesn't work. It just twists the definition of basic liberal democracy. Imagine in the US, if you have laws that say only Christians can be nationals of the US, Jews cannot be nationals, can only be citizens, and not entitled to full rights. This is the situation in Israel. Only Jewish citizens of Israel are nationals of Israel. Israel is the only country on earth that has no nationality that applies to all its citizens. Only its Jewish citizens are nationals and entitled to the full set of rights. Its non-Jewish citizens, are only citizens. They do not get many rights. For example, land ownership. 93% of the state land in Israel is off limits to non-Jewish citizens. 93%. If this is not apartheid, I don't know what is. And thus, the boycott. Talking about Gaza, several issues were mentioned: Sri Lanka, Tibet, and Sudan. Every injustice should be opposed. Of course, human rights should be applied equally everywhere. And why single out Israel? Is China a preferred member in the Western Club of Democracies? Does it receive billions and billions of US aid every year? Does it receive a US veto to protect it at the UN? None of that. Israel is the only country on earth that receives so much diplomatic, economic support, your tax money, billions and billions of dollars every year. You are subsidizing the occupation and apartheid that we're suffering from. Our oppression has Made in the USA written all over it because of this act of complicity, because of your tax money supporting Israel's oppression of the Palestinians. Thus, Israel matters a lot to US policy, and therefore, of course, we have to talk about Israel specifically because you're subsidizing it. You're not subsidizing the Sudanese in Darfur or the Chinese in Tibet. You are subsidizing Israel's siege of Gaza. You are subsidizing Israel's wall, built on occupied territory and therefore illegal. And therefore, the responsibility. The US has a huge responsibility to end Israel's oppression because it's simply financing that oppression. Instead of having better tuition for students, better hospitals, better education in the US, I mean, you have third world conditions in some parts of this country, for God's sake. Some children in this country are dying of hunger. In the US, the greatest nation on earth, you have people who have no health services or very minimal health services. Terrible education, terrible education. I'm shocked at the kind of education in some parts of this country you're getting. And you, at the same time, you can afford billions to support occupation and oppression. Why? Isn't it time to stop them? Then why boycott? I mean, can't you do it in any other way? What other way has worked? We've been occupied for 42 years. What has worked? What has all the negotiation and the dialogue groups, and what has it led to? Nil, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Obama clearly said, stop the settlements. A very minimal demand. I mean, all the settlements are illegal. They should be completely removed. He simply asked Israel to freeze them as a minimal gesture of goodwill. And they absolutely refused. They're continuing with settlement building. Even that they could not achieve. Talking about violence and non-violence. Palestinians, like any people under occupation, have a right to resist occupation by all means, according to international law. However, that does not give us the right to resist indiscriminately. We should not indiscriminately attack civilians, of course. This has moral issues, this has practical issues, but what concerns me most is the ethical issues. Targeting civilians, targeting indiscriminately the other side is just immoral and illegal. It should not be done. But we do have a right to resist by all means. So if people are saying, you know, we don't like this violent resistance, okay, you're entitled to it by UN resolutions and so on, you're entitled to it by international law. But, you know, we don't really like it. Okay, you don't like that. And you don't like our non-violent resistance, the sole form of non-violent resistance that all Palestinians agree on. The entire consensus of Palestinians agree on. All political parties, all unions, women, students, and so on agree on. BDS. It's a non-violent resistance. You don't like that either. What do you want us to do? Surrender? That's the third option left. You don't like violent resistance. You don't like non-violent resistance. The only option left to us is surrender. We shall not surrender. We shall continue to resist until we attain our full, equal human rights. Now, what does one state have to do with it? I've been advocating one state for 25 years, and I'm certainly not ashamed. I'm so proud to support a one-state solution. But in the BDS movement, we do not adopt a one-state solution. Why? Because it's a rights-based approach. It's based on the three rights I mentioned that we are granted under international law, basic human rights. Any solution, 2 states, 3 states, 5 states, I really do not care. As long as it gives us our basic rights, as long as all humans, Jews, Christians, Muslims, every human being is treated equally, I'm happy. But once you tell me, no, but there are some humans and some relative humans. And relative humans do not get the full set of rights. They get a subset of rights, because, they're not really fully human, after all. I will never accept that. No human is a relative human. All humans are equal. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, every human being is equal. Black, white, Latino, and so on. We cannot accept 2 sets of laws applying to 2 sets of people. So, finally, to wrap up, how long do I have? 1 minute? 2 minutes, great, wow. You mentioned I.F. Stone. I'm so glad you did, because you reminded me. I don't have the quote, but I'll paraphrase. I.F. Stone, the great American Jewish writer, wrote something really very insightful. He said, Jewish Americans are living a duplicity kind of thing. In the US, they were at the forefront with blacks, with African Americans, forefront of the civil rights movement, against racism, against inequality, against fundamentalism, and calling for separation of church from state. And in Israel, they tolerate banning civil marriages, mixed marriages, banning any equality between Jews and non-Jews, full equality. How can they accept those 2 things? How do they reconcile those 2 things? How can American Jews support full separation of church from state, full human rights, full democracy in the US? I remember when I went to Columbia University, once the governor of New York, the state of New York, dared to have a Christmas tree, which violates the separation of church and state. Many, many Jewish groups raised hell, as they should, and protested, and they took that down. They took the tree down, because a governor should not do that in the public office. But in Israel, it is completely biased towards Jewish rights, and completely biased against non-Jewish rights, and that's okay, that's tolerated. All the symbols of Israel, all the laws privilege Jews against non-Jews. Everything in Israel privileges its Jewish citizens, from land ownership to health to education to everything. There's discrimination across the board. I'll end with one clear example. Human Rights Watch, a study in 2001, I think, called Second Class, Discrimination Against Palestinians in the Israeli Education System. It said that the Israeli education system acts like a set of sieves, with the holes getting finer and finer as you go up, as it filters out more and more Palestinians when you reach college level, from kindergarten to college level. So at college level, you have very few Palestinians. In other words, finally, BDS is about attaining equal rights. Democracy as it really should be defined. Equal rights for everyone. Thank you.
And the negative rebuttal for 10 minutes.
I think I want to start by not rebutting, but agreeing with some of what Omar has had to say. Because we do agree that discrimination is awful. And there is discrimination within Israel. And so is there discrimination in the United States that I grew up in. And that changed, and it changed internally.